Welcome to Unsolved Cases. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're diving deep into one of America's most notorious unsolved murders. A case that has captivated the public imagination for over 7 decades and spawned countless theories, suspects, and investigations. On January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot at 3815 South Norton Avenue in Los Angeles, a horrific discovery would forever change the landscape of American crime. The dismembered body of Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress, was found bisected at the waist, drained of blood, and posed in a grotesque display that would haunt investigators for generations. The press would christen her the Black Dahlia, and her murder would become the most infamous unsolved case in LAPD history. But what makes this case truly extraordinary isn't just the brutality of the crime. It's the labyrinth of suspects, witnesses, and dark secrets that emerged in its wake. Over the next hour, we'll journey through this maze of evidence, examining each lead, each suspect, and each disturbing revelation that has kept this case alive in the public consciousness. From the last person to see Elizabeth alive to mysterious motel rooms soaked in blood, from cryptic letters to corrupt cops, from prominent surgeons to nightclub owners with underworld connections. This is the story of a murder that exposed the dark underbelly of 1940s Los Angeles, and a police investigation that may have been compromised from the very beginning. If you're captivated by bone-chilling mysteries and legendary crimes like the Black Dahlia murder, the Villisca Axe murders, or the haunting case of JonBenet Ramsey, then Scoob is your next true crime obsession. Featuring short, addictive episodes, Scoob delivers gripping true crime stories straight to your ears, perfect for your commute, workout, or late-night binge. With over 100,000 minutes of content and a rapidly growing community of 50,000-plus crime enthusiasts across the U.S., Scoob is your go-to hub for deep dives, fresh theories, and never-before-heard details. From cold cases to courtroom dramas, every episode leaves you wanting more. Download Scoob today. Available now on Play Store and the App Store. And don't forget to follow and subscribe to Unsolved Cases for brand new episodes dissecting the darkest corners of true crime. Coming back to the Black Dahlia case, our story begins with Robert "Red" Manley, a 25-year-old salesman from Huntington Park, who would become the prime focus of the initial investigation. Not because he was guilty, but because he was, in all likelihood, the last person to see Elizabeth Short alive. Manley's connection to Elizabeth began in San Diego in December 1946, during what he described as a chance encounter. Picture this: a married salesman on a business trip, spotting a strikingly beautiful young woman standing on a corner near Western Airlines. Despite being married, Manley was drawn to Elizabeth's beauty and approached her under the guise of offering a ride. Elizabeth initially ignored his advances, but Manley's persistence paid off. She eventually accepted his offer and guided him to Pacific Beach, where she was staying with friends. What followed was a dinner date that would forever link Manley to one of America's most notorious crimes. During their evening together, Manley learned about Elizabeth's supposed past as a widow to a major who had been killed in the war. A story that, like many details of Elizabeth's life, would later prove to be fabricated. He described kissing Elizabeth during their date, but noted her response as cold and indifferent, a detail that would prove significant to investigators trying to understand her final days. But it was Manley's second encounter with Elizabeth that would make him a household name. In early January 1947, he returned to San Diego for another business trip. When Elizabeth failed to appear at Western Airlines, where she falsely claimed to work, Manley drove to her residence. Elizabeth met him at the door with an unexpected request. She needed a ride to Los Angeles. They spent that night together in a motel, where they opted for hamburgers over returning to Los Angeles by bus. Manley emphasized that the evening was uneventful, with no romantic engagement, as Elizabeth felt unwell. It was during this stay that Manley noticed something disturbing: bad scratches on Elizabeth's arms. When he asked about them, Elizabeth attributed the marks to an earlier assault by a jealous boyfriend, whom she described as an Italian man with dark hair residing in San Diego. The next day, January 9, 1947, would be Elizabeth Short's last. After attending to his business obligations, Manley collected Elizabeth and began their journey to Los Angeles. They conversed freely during the drive, with Elizabeth inquiring if she might write to him, a request to which he agreed. She mentioned reuniting with her sister, Adrienne West, at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles. Upon arrival in downtown Los Angeles, Elizabeth first directed Manley to the Greyhound bus depot, where she checked her luggage. From there, it was just a short distance to the Biltmore Hotel. Once inside the elegant lobby, Elizabeth asked Manley to verify whether her sister had checked in while she went to the restroom. Finding no trace of her sister, Manley queried a couple of women in the lobby, but neither was related to Elizabeth. Eventually, he left Elizabeth in the hotel lobby, marking the last moment he would see her alive. This fact he would repeatedly assure detectives during the intensive questioning that followed. But there was another crucial detail that Manley shared with police. On January 8th, he had overheard Elizabeth making a long-distance call to a man in Los Angeles. During this conversation, she arranged to meet this individual downtown on January 9th, suggesting that her true intention in Los Angeles might have involved this mysterious man rather than her sister. When Elizabeth's mutilated body was discovered 6 days later, Manley immediately became the prime suspect. The police subjected him to relentless interrogations and multiple polygraph tests, administered by LAPD criminalist Ray Pinker. Despite the intensity of these examinations, Manley was ultimately cleared of any involvement in the crime. To better understand Manley's account, crime reporter Agnes Underwood from the Herald Express was given access to him. Her approach was disarmingly casual, incorporating a smile, a cigarette, and a handshake, which created the perfect atmosphere for a more relaxed and open dialogue. Through this interaction, Underwood secured an exclusive narrative that the newspaper published under the headline, "Red Tells Own Story of Romance with Dahlia." Throughout the investigation, Manley maintained his innocence with unwavering consistency. His sincerity was underscored by his willingness to undergo lie detector tests and even agree to truth serum administration, desperate to prove his innocence. When detectives pressed him to identify Elizabeth's belongings, a purse and high-heeled shoes found abandoned, Manley precisely identified her possessions, even recalling the shoes' unique double-heel taps, which Elizabeth had specifically requested from a San Diego cobbler. Most remarkably, Manley could still identify the scent of her perfume lingering in her purse, a detail that investigators found particularly convincing of his honesty. For nearly 60 years, one photograph haunted the Black Dahlia investigation, a strip photo showing Elizabeth Short with an unidentified young man. Various theories swirled around this mystery figure. Some speculated he was the actual murderer. Others imagined he was a troubled writer who left a suicide note on a beach in March 1947, walking into the ocean to his death. Some even thought he might have been Elizabeth's secret lover. In November 2004, investigators finally tracked down the man in the photograph, solving one of the case's most enduring mysteries. The truth, as it often is, was far simpler than the dramatic theories that had surrounded it for decades. The man was GERALD Moss, 83 years old at the time of the interview, a genuine and decent individual from the Midwest who candidly shared his story. GERALD met Elizabeth Short in Indianapolis, Indiana, in 1945, shortly after World War II ended. He was 24, she was 22, and he was immediately drawn to her striking beauty. Their encounter happened by chance in a location called The Circle in downtown Indianapolis. She was beautiful, and we struck up a conversation, hitting it off from the start, GERALD recalled. The city was abuzz with celebrations marking the end of the war, which set the backdrop for our spontaneous meeting. After talking for a while, they decided to take one of those quirky photo booth pictures that were popular at the time. GERALD vividly remembered the moment. Elizabeth wore a black dress, and I donned a light tan sports coat without a tie. She kept the picture we took. Their brief encounter continued with a bus ride to a popular local spot for a quick meal. We probably talked and ate for about 2 hours. She left afterward, continuing her journey alone. I gave her my phone number, asking her to call when she reached California, but that call never came. GERALD explained that he wasn't part of military service due to severe hay fever, which would have been problematic in battle conditions. At the time, he worked as a machinist at General Motors, a far cry from the dangerous criminal some had imagined him to be. The significance of their brief encounter only became clear when GERALD's friend Tracy noticed the newspaper story about Elizabeth's murder, featuring the photograph of GERALD with the victim. Tracy immediately called GERALD, leading to his prompt contact with the Los Angeles police. After Tracy alerted me about the picture in Elizabeth's possession, I called the police right away, identifying myself as the unidentified man in the papers. I wasn't in LA, having only met Elizabeth for a few hours in Indianapolis, GERALD explained. This revelation perfectly illustrated how the Black Dahlia case had been magnified by speculation and myth-making. What had been portrayed as a sinister mystery man with potential connections to the murder was simply a young Midwesterner who had shared a pleasant afternoon with Elizabeth during her travels. GERALD's story also provided insight into Elizabeth's journey westward. She was clearly making her way to California, meeting people along the way, collecting experiences, and perhaps romantic encounters that would later be scrutinized by investigators looking for clues to her murder. While Robert Manley was considered the last person to see Elizabeth Short alive, there was another witness whose testimony would prove equally significant and far more controversial. Retired Los Angeles policewoman MYRL McBride. McBride had a pivotal encounter with Elizabeth Short just hours before her tragic death, making her not just a witness, but potentially the actual last person to see the victim alive. What makes her testimony particularly compelling is that, as a police officer, she couldn't be easily dismissed or considered mistaken in her identification, something that would create significant problems for the LAPD. At the time of a subsequent inquiry, McBride resided roughly an hour's distance from Los Angeles. Despite the passage of time dimming her recollection of some details, the core facts of her encounter with Elizabeth Short remained uncontested. McBride's account was straightforward but explosive in its implications. She confidently recalled that the woman who approached her and later accompanied her to a bar on Main Street was indeed Elizabeth Short. More importantly, McBride stressed that she was never presented with photographs of any potential suspects by detectives, not in the immediate aftermath of the murder, nor in the subsequent months or years. While McBride could no longer recall the detailed descriptions of 2 men and a woman who were with Elizabeth Short when they left the bar at 5th and Main Streets, her observations would have been thoroughly documented at the time. The critical detail that emerged from McBride's testimony was deeply disturbing. Elizabeth Short had confided in her about being menaced by a jealous suitor who was threatening to kill her if she was seen with another man. This revelation was consistent with Elizabeth's narrative to Robert Manley about the scratches on her arms, and aligned with her behavior while seeking refuge at the French's home in San Diego, driven by fear for her life. It painted a picture of a young woman who was genuinely terrified in her final days. The LAPD found themselves in an impossible position with McBride's testimony. They couldn't discredit or dismiss one of their own officers without causing a significant public relations disaster. With information already circulating in the press, it appears the detectives attempted damage control by encouraging McBride to reconsider her statements. The pressure tactics were subtle but clear. Detectives likely posed questions designed to create doubt. Are you absolutely certain the woman was Elizabeth Short, who expressed fear for her life? Could it have been someone else? These weren't genuine attempts to verify facts. They were efforts to manage a narrative that was becoming inconvenient for the investigation. Following what appeared to be successful damage control, the department informed the media that upon re-evaluation, McBride was no longer entirely certain about her initial identification. But this manufactured uncertainty came at a cost. McBride was quietly transferred to the Harbor Division, where she could continue her career away from the spotlight. More than half a century later, when interviewed again, MYRL McBride reaffirmed with absolute conviction that the woman she observed leaving the Main Street bar on that fateful day was indeed Elizabeth Short. Her steadfast certainty, maintained across decades, suggests that the initial pressure to recant had been external rather than based on genuine doubt. McBride's testimony reveals something crucial about the Black Dahlia investigation. The LAPD was more concerned with managing public perception than following evidence where it led. Her account of Elizabeth's fear, combined with the mysterious men and woman she was seen with just hours before her death, represented leads that should have been vigorously pursued. Instead, they were buried beneath departmental politics and image management. No location in the Black Dahlia case is more chilling than the Aster Motel, a seedy establishment that may have been the actual site of Elizabeth Short's torture and murder. The events that unfolded there paint a picture so horrific that even hardened investigators were shaken by what they discovered. The Aster Motel, operational for only a month since December 1946, was owned by Henry Hoffman, a previous inmate at Leavenworth Penitentiary, due to mail fraud, who was also suffering from syphilis. On the morning of January 15, 1947, the same day Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, Hoffman made a gruesome discovery in Cabin 3 that would link his establishment to one of America's most notorious murders. When Hoffman entered Cabin 3 that morning, he found a scene so horrifically tarnished that it defied description. Blood and fecal matter were scattered throughout the floor, bathroom, and even up the walls of the lavatory. The disorder was so appalling that Hoffman took the task of cleaning upon himself, warning his wife Clora against entering the cabin for fear it might make her ill. The linens on the bed were so deeply stained with blood they needed to be soaked prior to laundry. Even the blankets required extensive cleaning due to the same gruesome stains. But the discovery in Cabin 3 was only part of the horror that morning. Clora Hoffman, who later became Mrs. Sarton after divorcing Henry and remarrying, vividly remembered finding human prints, likely made by a man, amidst the blood and feces. But her most significant discovery was a peculiar bundle found in Cabin 9 on the same morning. This bundle contained items wrapped in brown paper tied with a cord, appearing as though prepared for mailing. Inside this bundle were a woman's small-sized skirt, blouse, and a pair of men's shorts, all stained with blood. The contents were so disturbing that although Clora had initially considered cleaning the blouse and skirt for her daughter Pamela, Henry insisted on burning them instead. Lila Durant, a maid at the Aster Motel, confirmed the terrifying details. She recalled that the items in the bundle closely resembled what Elizabeth Short was alleged to have worn when she vanished: a white blouse with front ruffles, a black skirt, and bloodied men's shorts, size 32, suspected to be used as a rag on the flooring. Lila estimated the skirt to be a size 13 or 14. Most disturbing of all, Lila recalled seeing a bloodstain the size of a large clock seeping from the linens onto the mattress. What made this detail particularly significant was that cleaning was not a chore Henry typically undertook, raising suspicions about his eagerness to single-handedly clean the room. When Gangster Squad officers later questioned Clora about what might have transpired in Cabin 3, she postulated that some sexual deviant had occupied the room. She revealed that although regular police had stopped by the motel soon after the mess was discovered, they were only searching for an Army sergeant linked with the Dahlia case, apparently missing the significance of what had occurred right under their noses. When asked why she hadn't disclosed the incident to the police at the time, Clora explained their ongoing difficulties with law enforcement. They simply wanted no further involvement. Henry's reluctance was even more understandable given his recent troubles, including an arrest on January 11th for a domestic dispute that had landed him in jail for a night. The timing was particularly suspicious. The Aster Motel incident occurred on January 15, 1947, the exact same day Elizabeth Short's body was discovered in the vacant lot on Norton Avenue. The proximity of these events suggests that whoever tortured and killed Elizabeth had cleaned up the scene at the motel while her body was being found just miles away. Adding to the evidence was an unexpectedly high laundry bill shortly after the murder, noted as peculiar by investigators. This anomaly correlated with the extensive cleaning efforts required after the bloody discovery, highlighting unusual behavior that deepened the gangster squad's scrutiny of the events. The Aster Motel represents one of the most compelling pieces of physical evidence in the entire Black Dahlia case. The blood, the clothing, the timing, and the desperate cleanup efforts all point to this location as the actual crime scene. Yet, like so many other leads in this case, it appears the investigation was either incompetent or deliberately misdirected away from following this evidence to its logical conclusion. At the dark heart of the Black Dahlia case lurks Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner whose name appeared prominently on Elizabeth Short's address book cover, and whose connections to corruption and violence paint him as one of the most compelling suspects in the murder. Hansen owned the Florentine Gardens nightclub and had significant underworld connections that would prove crucial to understanding how the Black Dahlia investigation was compromised from within. According to Dr. J. Paul DeRiver and several credible Los Angeles crime reporters, Hansen had an unhealthy obsession with Elizabeth Short that would ultimately lead to her death. The story that emerged through Dr. DeRiver's investigation was both chilling and plausible. Hansen was said to have a motive connected to his possessiveness toward Elizabeth Short, becoming enviously enraged by her multitude of boyfriends and irritated by her persistent requests for financial support. According to Dr. DeRiver, Hansen allegedly made a remark akin to, "Someone get rid of that girl," not anticipating the drastic measures that would be taken in response. The comparison to Henry II's infamous question, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" which led to Thomas Beckett's murder, was particularly apt. Like the king who spoke in anger, without expecting literal action, Hansen's words were allegedly taken as a directive by Leslie Dillon, described as a member of Hansen's cohort of pimps. Several reputable Los Angeles crime reporters confirmed their belief that LAPD Detective Finis Brown acted as a bagman for Mark Hansen. Tony Valdez from Fox News, Chuck Cheatham from the Long Beach Independent, and Neeson Himmel from the Los Angeles Times all suspected this corrupt relationship. The suspicion was also echoed by figures like Harry Lawson and members of the grand jury. The Mormons were convinced of Hansen's close ties with Finis Brown and told Frank Jemison that Officers Case and Ahern lamented having their hands tied in the investigation. Consistently, law enforcement appeared to be subservient to Hansen's directives, a clear indication that the investigation was compromised from the beginning. Journalist Neeson Himmel provided the most detailed account of the suspected corruption. Years later, he described Hansen as Finis Brown's layoff man, revealing that Brown was indebted to Hansen for a substantial sum of $5,000, a significant amount in the 1940s. According to Himmel, Hansen's advances toward Elizabeth Short were consistently rejected, leading to his intense frustration and ultimately to her murder. Himmel proposed that Finis Brown not only shielded Hansen, but also manipulated his brother, Thad Brown, the chief of detectives, to aid in concealing evidence. In exchange for this protection, Hansen allegedly forgave Brown's substantial debt. The corruption extended beyond just the Brown brothers. Walter Morgan from the district attorney's office, one of the chief investigators in the Dahlia case, was married to Tanya Sugar Geiza, a notable dancer at Hansen's Florentine Gardens. This placed Morgan in the impossible position of investigating a case connected to his wife's friend and employer, a conflict of interest that should have disqualified him from the investigation entirely. Evidence of Hansen's special relationship with the LAPD was abundant. Finis Brown openly disclosed that Hansen functioned as a police informant. When Jeff Connors separated from his wife, Grace Allen, policemen were present to escort her to Hansen's residence. Most tellingly, after being wounded by Lola Titus, Hansen immediately commanded, "Get me Brown," showcasing the direct line of communication between the nightclub owner and the detective. But perhaps the most significant evidence pointing to Hansen's involvement was the address book itself. Elizabeth Short's censored address book prominently displayed Mark Hansen's name on its cover, yet lacked an entry for Leslie Dillon, the man suspected of actually carrying out the murder. This seemed to suggest that the perpetrator was intentionally trying to implicate, intimidate, or coerce Hansen. The mysterious phone calls made to Hansen's residence just before Elizabeth Short's murder add another layer of evidence. These calls, combined with the address book being sent to media outlets, suggest a complex relationship between Hansen, the actual killer, and the victim. Dr. DeRiver's theory was that Leslie Dillon possessed inside knowledge of Hansen's underworld dealings and police connections, which he used to threaten the homicide detectives with exposure, thus maneuvering his own release from suspicion. This would explain why Dillon, despite being a prime suspect, was never seriously pursued by the investigation. The Mark Hansen connection reveals the Black Dahlia case for what it truly was, not just a murder investigation, but a cover-up orchestrated by corrupt police officers protecting their criminal benefactor. The fact that Hansen's name was literally on the cover of Elizabeth's address book, yet he was never seriously investigated, shows just how deep the corruption ran in 1940s Los Angeles. Ever find yourself haunted by the question, how do some cases stay cold for decades? Dive into the shadows with Scoob as we peel back layers of mystery in cases like the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, the West Memphis 3 case, the mysterious death of Natalie Wood, and many more. Every episode takes you deeper into the twists, theories, and forensic breakthroughs behind these real-life enigmas. Designed for true crime fans who want more than just headlines, Scoob's quick, compelling episodes make it easy to stay hooked wherever you are. Download Scoob now on the App Store and Google Play, because the truth is out there, and it starts here. Returning to the Black Dahlia case, let's dive deep into a piece of evidence that offered information about a possible killer's psyche. Among the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the Black Dahlia case were a series of letters received by Dr. J. Paul DeRiver from a mysterious individual calling himself Jack Sand. These letters, with their intimate knowledge of the crime and psychological insights into the killer's mind, provide a chilling window into the twisted psyche behind Elizabeth Short's murder. The correspondence began on November 27th, when Dr. DeRiver received the first communication from Jack Sand. Within this letter, Jack detailed his acquaintance with a man named Jeff Connor, whom he had met in San Francisco. Jeff was suspected in Elizabeth Short's murder, and Jack's account of their 6-week relationship would prove deeply unsettling. Jack recounted witnessing Jeff engage in sexual activities with 2 women they encountered at a bar, and revealed that Jeff had shared his acquaintance with Elizabeth Short, often visiting the same bars she frequented. As the investigation intensified, and police began interviewing Jeff's acquaintances, he fled Los Angeles to avoid questioning. But it was a detail about Jeff's artistic abilities that sent chills down investigators' spines. Jack described how Jeff had created a pencil sketch of him during their time together. This sketch, marked with a signature reading Jeff 48, featured a distinct pattern of shading and cross-hatching that was remarkably reminiscent of the intricate lacerations found on Elizabeth Short's body. Dr. DeRiver immediately suspected that Jack was a pseudonym and subsequent letters would confirm his growing suspicions about the true identity of the correspondent. More letters from Jack Sand followed, each revealing deeper insights into a disturbed mind, obsessed with sexual sadism. On December 11th, Jack confessed to having a strong fascination with sexual sadism. He described Jeff as a loyal individual, suggesting that if Jeff had any incriminating information regarding Jack, it was unlikely he would reveal it. This statement seemed to position Jack as the dominant figure in their relationship, with Jeff as the subordinate who could be trusted to keep secrets. Jack's characterization of Jeff was particularly revealing. He described Jeff as having a sensitive and tender nature, combined with a hint of cunning and slyness. But it was Jack's hypothesis about Elizabeth Short's murder that provided the most chilling insight into the killer's psychology. Jack suggested that perhaps an associate of Elizabeth, following an unconventional affair, might have been derided or threatened with exposure by her. As a result, in a desire for vengeance, he might have inflicted some form of pain on her, inadvertently triggering a new sensation that eventually resulted in her complete annihilation, and possibly that of other victims. This theory revealed an understanding of how sexual sadism could escalate from initial acts of revenge to complete psychological domination and ultimately murder. The suggestion that there might be other victims was particularly disturbing, hinting at a serial killer rather than a crime of passion. The letters themselves provided additional evidence of their author's true identity. They were riddled with errors in spelling, grammar, and syntax, such as acquittance, disappointed, and predominate. Even the envelopes contained mistakes, like one addressed as Especial Delivar. Dr. de River noted that similar grammatical inconsistencies appeared in letters attributed to the supposed Dahlia killer that had been sent to newspapers, such as, "Here is Dahlia's possessions," and "Had my fun at the police." This pattern suggested that the same person was behind both sets of correspondence. Perhaps most significantly, Jack consistently referred to the murder victim simply as Elizabeth, without using her full name or referencing the Dahlia case, which struck Dr. de River as an intimate manner of address that suggested personal knowledge of the victim. Adding to the circumstantial evidence, Elizabeth Short's last letter to Gordon Fickling mentioned she would work as a model for a person named Jack, a detail that seemed too coincidental given the correspondence Dr. de River was receiving. Dr. de River believed that Jack's decision to write to the police revealed a psychological need for attention and a desire to boast about a crime that had captivated the nation. This tendency to seek recognition and engage with law enforcement was characteristic of certain types of killers who derive satisfaction not just from the crime itself, but from the intellectual game of taunting investigators. The Jack Sand letters represent one of the most psychologically complex pieces of evidence in the Black Dahlia case. They reveal a killer who was not only physically brutal, but intellectually sophisticated, someone who understood both the mechanics of torture and the psychology of fear. Most disturbingly, they suggest that Elizabeth Short's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of escalating sexual violence that may have claimed other victims. On February 17, 1947, just over a month after Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, Los Angeles police arrested Otto PARZYJEGLA for the brutal murder of his 70-year-old employer, Alfred Hige. The circumstances of this crime would briefly make PARZYJEGLA the most promising suspect in the Black Dahlia case, until a police lineup would definitively rule him out. PARZYJEGLA was a 36-year-old linotype operator employed at a Los Angeles printing shop owned by Hige, who published a Swedish newspaper. The crime PARZYJEGLA confessed to was almost incomprehensibly brutal. He had not only murdered his elderly employer, but dismembered Hige's body into 6 parts, concealing these remains in 3 boxes at the back of the print shop. What made PARZYJEGLA's confession particularly disturbing was his psychological state. He repeatedly told police that the entire event felt surreal, describing it as a dream from which he expected to wake up. This detachment from reality suggested either genuine mental illness or a psychological defense mechanism against the horror of what he had done. LAPD Captain Donahoe immediately recognized the potential connection between PARZYJEGLA's crime and the Black Dahlia murder. The similarities were striking. Both crimes involved dismemberment, both showed evidence of methodical planning, and both demonstrated a level of brutality that suggested psychological disturbance rather than simple criminal intent. But it was a specific piece of evidence that made Donahoe believe he might have found the Black Dahlia killer. One of the letters from the supposed Black Dahlia suspect appeared to have originated from someone with access to a printing establishment. Given that PARZYJEGLA worked in a print shop and had access to various types of paper and printing equipment, this connection seemed highly significant. LAPD police chemist Ray Pinker was brought in to examine proof sheet paper collected from Hyge's printing office, which matched the type of paper used in one of the notes sent by the Black Dahlia killer. This physical evidence seemed to create a direct link between PARZYJEGLA's workplace and the Dahlia correspondence. Donahoe was so confident in this connection that he announced to the press that PARZYJEGLA was the most promising suspect so far in the Black Dahlia murder case. The captain scheduled a live identification lineup for Tuesday, February 18, 1947, at 2 p.m., orchestrated for multiple witnesses who claimed to have seen Elizabeth Short with different individuals during the final days of her life. The lineup included Tony Manilatos and other key witnesses who had reported seeing Elizabeth Short in various locations around Los Angeles. Donahoe's strategy was to present PARZYJEGLA to a wide range of witnesses, hoping that someone might identify him as having been in the company of either Elizabeth Short or Jean French, another recent murder victim. PARZYJEGLA was physically described as a tall man of 36 years, with a light complexion, darkish blonde hair, and notably strong hands, characteristics that could have fit witness descriptions of men seen with Elizabeth Short. The strong hands detail was particularly significant given the physical evidence of the dismemberment in both the Hyge murder and the Black Dahlia case. Despite his confession to murdering Hyge, PARZYJEGLA forcefully denied any involvement with the murders of Elizabeth Short and Jean French. His denials were consistent and emphatic, showing none of the psychological detachment he displayed when discussing the Hyge murder. The crucial test came on February 19, 1947, during the police lineup held at the Wilshire Division Station. Several women who had been victims of attempted attacks, as well as other witnesses involved in the French and Dahlia cases, were brought in to view the suspect. The results were definitive and disappointing for investigators. Not a single witness identified PARZYJEGLA. This failure to identify PARZYJEGLA effectively ruled him out as a suspect in both the Black Dahlia and Jean French investigations. Despite the promising connections, the printing shop link, the similar brutality, and the psychological profile, there was simply no evidence placing him with either victim. On February 20, 1947, PARZYJEGLA was officially charged with the murder of Alfred Hyge, which he continued to refer to as a dream murder. His case was concluded with this single charge, but the psychological evaluation of PARZYJEGLA provided insights that remained relevant to the Black Dahlia investigation. The PARZYJEGLA case demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of the Black Dahlia investigation. On one hand, it showed that police were actively pursuing leads and using scientific methods like paper analysis to establish connections. On the other hand, it revealed how desperate investigators were to find a suspect, sometimes allowing hope to override careful analysis. With PARZYJEGLA eliminated, the LAPD's focus shifted back to San Diego, where new clues had emerged. 4 detectives were assigned to investigate these leads, though the nature of the evidence remained classified, as police maintained tight control over information in the ongoing investigation. 2 prominent physicians would become suspects in the Black Dahlia case, though for very different reasons and with vastly different levels of evidence against them. Their stories reveal how speculation and circumstantial evidence can create compelling narratives that may obscure the truth. Dr. Walter A. Bayley, The Coincidental Connection. Larry Harnish, a Los Angeles Times staff writer, developed one of the most geographically compelling theories when he proposed Dr. Walter A. Bayley as a Black Dahlia suspect. Writing on the 50th anniversary of the murder, Harnish built his case on several intriguing connections. Dr. Bayley was a renowned surgeon, which aligned perfectly with the LAPD's hypothesis that Elizabeth Short's murder and subsequent bisection required skilled surgical knowledge. The precision of the cuts and the apparent medical expertise demonstrated in the dismemberment had long convinced investigators that they were looking for someone with advanced anatomical knowledge. More intriguingly, Dr. Bayley had a direct geographical connection to the crime scene. His estranged wife resided at 3959 South Norton Avenue, less than a block away from where Elizabeth Short's body was discovered. This proximity seemed too coincidental to ignore, especially when combined with his medical background. Adding to the circumstantial evidence, Dr. Bayley's daughter was acquainted with Elizabeth Short's sister, Adrienne West, and had even been a witness at her wedding. This connection suggested a possible link between the Bayley family and the Short family that could have provided an introduction between the doctor and the victim. Harnish also speculated about Dr. Bayley's relationship with Dr. Alexandra von Partyka, a colleague in the medical field. The theory suggested that Bayley had left his wife for von Partyka, and that she might have discovered his alleged crime and was extorting him. However, when examined more closely, the case against Dr. Bayley crumbled. At the time of Elizabeth Short's murder, Dr. Bayley was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, leaving him without the mental agility or physical capability necessary to execute such a complex crime or engage in psychological games with the police. The real explanation for any concerns about Dr. von Partyka was far more mundane. Research revealed that Dr. Bayley's practice was located at the same address as Dr. Audrain, who was identified as the leader of a protected abortion operation. It appeared that Dr. Bayley might have been involved in this illegal abortion ring, and any extortion concerns related to this criminal activity rather than murder. Most remarkably, there was an extraordinary coincidence that went unnoticed during the original investigation. Elizabeth Short's body was discovered by Mrs. Betty Bersinger, who reported the crime by seeking help from the nearest house, the second residence on Norton Avenue from 39th Street, which was owned by a doctor. This house was very likely the former residence of Dr. Walter Bayley and his estranged wife Ruth. Dr. George HODEL, the son's obsession. The case against Dr. George HODEL was built primarily by his own son, Steve HODEL, a former LAPD officer who wrote several books asserting that his father was the Black Dahlia killer. Steve's argument rested on two main pieces of evidence: witness statements claiming George knew Elizabeth Short, and a supposed confession caught on surveillance recordings. The first piece of evidence involved two people who claimed that George HODEL knew Elizabeth Short. However, this testimony was contradicted by numerous other witnesses. Importantly, Elizabeth Short's close circle of friends and family members, including Ann Toth, Marjorie Graham, Lynn Martin, and her own relatives, never mentioned George HODEL or any doctor among her associates. The second key piece of evidence was an alleged statement recorded during surveillance of George HODEL's Franklin Avenue home in 1950. The statement was, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Steve HODEL interpreted this as a confession, but the context suggests otherwise. When these recordings were made, George HODEL was under investigation for multiple allegations, including tax evasion, illegal abortions, alleged communist ties, and the suspicious death of his secretary. Given his extensive media exposure and awareness that he was a suspect in the Dahlia murder, it was natural for him to reference these allegations during conversations. More importantly, transcripts revealed that George HODEL was aware of being bugged. He had searched for listening devices and instructed his housekeeper to look for hidden recording equipment. It seemed highly improbable that someone aware of surveillance would candidly confess to murder over the phone. The case against George HODEL was further weakened by the lack of physical evidence. He had no ties to Leimert Park, where Elizabeth's body was found, no connection to the Crenshaw site where her personal items were discovered, and no association with the Aster Motel. Additionally, while some witnesses described seeing Elizabeth with a man driving a black car, George HODEL drove a black Packard rather than the Ford associated with the crime scene. Perhaps most significantly, George HODEL had returned from China in 1946 due to a major heart attack. His recovery occupied September and October in a hospital, raising serious questions about his physical ability to commit such a demanding crime. George HODEL's lawyer had made an ill-conceived jest during his trial for molestation charges, suggesting that his daughter's accusations were as outlandish as claiming he was the Black Dahlia killer. This legal strategy backfired spectacularly, thrusting George into the center of the Black Dahlia narrative and creating a connection that existed more in public perception than in evidence. Both medical suspects in the Black Dahlia case demonstrate how circumstantial evidence and compelling narratives can create convincing theories without solid foundations. Dr. BAYLEY's geographical proximity and medical expertise made him an attractive suspect until his medical condition ruled out his involvement. Dr. HODEL's case was built on speculation and misinterpretation of evidence by a son seeking to understand his complex father. The Black Dahlia murder did not occur in isolation. Los Angeles in the 1940s was experiencing a wave of brutal crimes against young women, and investigators began to see disturbing patterns that suggested a serial killer might be operating in the city. Two cases in particular showed striking similarities to Elizabeth Short's murder: the death of Georgette Bauerdorf and the murder of Louise Springer. The Georgette Bauerdorf connection. Joel Lesnick began analyzing the similarities between Elizabeth Short's murder and the homicide of Georgette Bauerdorf, which fell under the jurisdiction of Detective Sergeant Louis Danoff in the Sheriff's Department. The parallels were immediately striking and deeply disturbing. Both murder cases shared certain horrifying similarities that suggested the same perpetrator. Most significantly, both victims were found in water, and both appeared to have been strangled or partially strangled not by external pressure applied to the neck, but through the insertion of an object into the mouth or throat. In Elizabeth Short's case, ligature marks were identified on her neck, yet there was no significant internal damage. The black underpants reportedly removed from her mouth while she was unconscious showed evidence of blood absorption, suggesting they had been used as a gag that caused unconsciousness through suffocation or strangulation. In Georgette Bauerdorf's case, material found in her throat was torn and gritted tightly due to rigor mortis at death, indicating a similar method of internal strangulation. The parallel was too specific to be coincidental. However, there was a crucial difference in the causes of death. Bauerdorf's murder might not have been premeditated. It appeared to happen during a physical attack. Elizabeth Short's death, by contrast, was far more calculated and brutal. The autopsy findings revealed that Elizabeth Short's death did not result from suffocation, despite the evidence of the gag. Instead, her demise coincided precisely with the severing of her body, as supported by the presence of ecchymosis along the incision line. Blood had spurted forcefully at this location, indicating that the cut had severed an artery, causing nearly instant death due to massive hemorrhage. While Jack Wilson was strongly suspected in Bauerdorf's case, with tangible links through fingerprint comparisons between the murder scene and Bauerdorf's car, the LAPD faced significant challenges in identifying conclusive physical evidence tying him to the Black Dahlia murder. The connection remained largely circumstantial, though compelling. The Louise Springer murder. Louise Springer's murder, on June 13, 1949, presented even more disturbing parallels to the Black Dahlia case, leading investigators to believe they might be dealing with the same killer. The geographical proximity alone was staggering. Louise was a 28-year-old woman who worked at a beauty salon on Crenshaw Boulevard, near Santa Barbara Avenue. On that fateful evening, her husband Lawrence arrived at approximately 9:15 p.m. to pick her up in their new Studebaker convertible. When Louise realized she had forgotten her eyeglasses at work, Lawrence offered to fetch them, along with buying a newspaper and cigarettes from a nearby drugstore. His absence lasted less than 10 minutes, but when Lawrence returned, both Louise and their vehicle had vanished. Despite his immediate contact with the LAPD, the desk officer informed him that a formal missing person report could not be filed until she had been missing for 24 hours. A bureaucratic delay that may have cost valuable investigative time. 3 days later, Lawrence's worst fears were confirmed when Louise's body was discovered in the back seat of their car. The perpetrator had left the vehicle parked inconspicuously on a quiet residential street, just 1 hour after the abduction and murder. The crime showed the same methodical planning and brutal execution that characterized the Black Dahlia murder. Within a 45-minute window, the suspect had forcibly abducted Louise, using a pre-cut clothesline rope they had brought along to strangle her. The killer then sexually assaulted her, using an improvised 14-inch tree limb, demonstrating the same sadistic tendencies evident in Elizabeth Short's murder. After the assault and murder, the perpetrator placed Louise's body on the car's rear seat, obscuring it with a beautician's tarp that Louise used in her work, showing intimate knowledge of her profession and belongings. Most significantly, the site of Louise Springer's abduction was on South Crenshaw Boulevard, just north of Santa Barbara Avenue, lying merely about 500 yards from the location where Elizabeth Short's dismembered body had been discovered at 3815 South Norton Avenue 2 years earlier. This proximity was far too close to be coincidental. The geographical connection was reinforced by other evidence. Both women were connected to the beauty industry. Elizabeth had aspirations of modeling and acting, while Louise worked as a beautician. Both were young, attractive women who were vulnerable at the times of their attacks. Detective Harry Hansen took the initiative to review the Dahlia case files, specifically looking for connections to the Springer murder. The similarities in methodology, geographical location, and victim profile suggested that if they weren't dealing with the same killer, they were at least confronting someone who was either copying the Black Dahlia murder or was part of the same criminal network. These connected crimes paint a picture of 1940s Los Angeles as a hunting ground for a sadistic killer who targeted young women in the entertainment and beauty industries. The sophistication of the crimes, the geographical clustering, and the similar methodologies suggest that Elizabeth Short may have been just one victim in a larger pattern of violence that continued for years after her death. The most damaging revelations about the Black Dahlia investigation concern Leslie Dillon, a suspect who should have been the focus of intensive investigation, but was instead protected by the very officers supposed to be seeking justice for Elizabeth Short. The Dillon case exposes the depth of corruption that compromised the investigation from its earliest stages. On the same day that Thad Brown received confirmation that Leslie Dillon could not verify his alibi in San Francisco during Elizabeth Short's murder, Lieutenant Frank Jemison presented a preliminary report to his superiors at the District Attorney's Office. This report, ostensibly based on information from Officers Finis Brown and Ed Barrett from the Homicide Division, was designed not to pursue justice, but to prevent any additional investigations into Leslie Dillon. The report began by acknowledging several problematic aspects of the case, including significant controversy surrounding Leslie Dillon's exact whereabouts on the night of January 14th to 15th, 1947. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Elizabeth Short in a drugged state at the Aster Motel around this time, a crucial piece of evidence that should have prompted intensive investigation. Perhaps most shocking was the revelation that Elizabeth Short's vital organs had been sent for chemical analysis to determine if she had been drugged, but were reportedly discarded during a laboratory cleanup without any testing being performed. This accident eliminated crucial evidence that might have proven Short was incapacitated during her torture and murder. Under Sergeant Finis Brown's guidance, Lieutenant Jemison reviewed selected excerpts from recorded conversations between Leslie Dillon and Dr. Paul DeRiver. Much of the crucial tape was conveniently difficult to understand, but what could be discerned was carefully edited to minimize Dillon's suspicious knowledge. For example, when Dr. DeRiver asked Dillon what he thought the killer might have done with the hair shaved from Elizabeth Short's body, Dillon suggested it would likely have been flushed down a toilet. Regarding the piece of flesh with a tattoo removed from Short's thigh, Dillon speculated it would have been disposed of in the same manner. These responses showed intimate knowledge of details that had not been released to the public. Jemison's report criticized prior police administrators for involving the gangster squad and Dr. DeRiver in the investigation, suggesting that control should have remained with the Homicide Division, the very division that was under investigation for corruption. This was a clear attempt to centralize control with the compromised officers. Most tellingly, Jemison emphasized that there was no evidence of bribery, misconduct, or concealment of facts by any officers involved. This defensive statement appeared in a report that was supposed to be investigating the case, not defending the investigators. The report's fundamental flaw was its reliance on information from the very officers who were under investigation by the grand jury. Finis Brown, who was suspected of being Mark Hansen's bagman, was presented as a reliable source of information about his own potential corruption. Despite Jemison's attempt to discourage further investigation, the 1949 grand jury was not deterred. Harry Lawson and his fellow jurors decided to continue their investigation, focusing specifically on Leslie Dillon, Mark Hansen, and ties to the Aster Motel. They instructed Frank Jemison to travel to San Francisco to conclusively determine Leslie Dillon's location on January 14th or 15th, 1947. The grand jury's persistence revealed the true scope of the corruption. They summoned members of the police department to testify regarding the sequence of events in the Dahlia case, ensuring a comprehensive inquiry that the Homicide Division desperately wanted to avoid. Dr. DeRiver's theory about Leslie Dillon was particularly compelling. He believed that Dillon possessed inside knowledge of Mark Hansen's underworld dealings and police connections, which he used to threaten the homicide detectives with exposure. This blackmail explained why Dillon, despite being a prime suspect with means, motive, and opportunity, was never seriously pursued by the investigation. The scenario that emerged was chilling in its implications. Leslie Dillon had allegedly carried out Mark Hansen's murderous wishes, killing Elizabeth Short in the Aster Motel in a frenzy of sexual violence. When Hansen realized the gravity of what had been done, he relied on his connections with the Brown brothers to suppress the investigation. Finis Brown, already indebted to Hansen for $5,000, was in no position to refuse. He not only shielded both Hansen and Dillon, but also manipulated his brother Thad Brown, the chief of detectives, to aid in concealing evidence. In exchange, Hansen forgave Brown's substantial debt. The corruption extended throughout the investigation. Evidence was destroyed, witnesses were discouraged from coming forward, and promising leads were deliberately ignored. The grand jury investigation revealed that the Black Dahlia case was not just an unsolved murder. It was a successful cover-up, orchestrated by corrupt police officers protecting their criminal associates. Leslie Dillon represented the strongest suspect in the Black Dahlia case, but he was protected by the same system that was supposed to bring him to justice. His case reveals that the investigation was compromised from the beginning, ensuring that Elizabeth Short's killer would never be brought to trial. Can't shake the feeling of unfinished justice? Step into the unknown with Scoob, the ultimate podcast platform for true crime lovers, obsessed with the cases that never got closure. Whether it's high-profile crimes that shocked the world or hidden mysteries that flew under the radar, Scoob delivers punchy, addictive episodes that keep you coming back for more. Join a growing community of listeners determined to uncover the truth and keep these cold cases alive. No filler, no fluff, just raw, riveting storytelling. Ready when you are. Subscribe on Scoob and stay updated on haunting unsolved cases that still demand answers. Available now on the App Store and Play Store. As we reach the end of our journey through the labyrinthine Black Dahlia case, we're left with more questions than answers, which is perhaps fitting for a mystery that has captivated America for over 7 decades. What we've uncovered is not just the story of a brutal murder, but a tale of institutional corruption, compromised investigations, and a justice system that failed Elizabeth Short as completely in death as society had failed her in life. The evidence we've examined points not to a single killer acting alone, but to a network of corruption that protected the guilty and obscured the truth. The physical evidence from the Aster Motel, the witness testimony of MYRL McBride, the psychological insights from the Jack Sand letters, and the financial corruption connecting Mark Hansen to Detective Finis Brown all paint a picture of a conspiracy that ensured this case would never be solved through official channels. Elizabeth Short was a young woman seeking her dreams in the City of Angels, but she found herself trapped in a web of predators and corrupt officials who viewed her as disposable. Her murder was not just an act of individual violence, but a symptom of a system that allowed powerful men to operate with impunity. The suspects we've examined, from Robert Manley's tragic position as the last innocent person to see her alive, to the various dangerous men who crossed her path in her final days, represent different aspects of 1940s Los Angeles. Some, like Gerald Moss, were simply young people whose brief encounters with Elizabeth became magnified by the mythology surrounding her death. Others, like Mark Hansen and Leslie Dillon, appear to have been directly involved in a conspiracy that led to her murder and its subsequent cover-up. What makes the Black Dahlia case enduringly fascinating is not just its brutality or its unsolved status, but what it reveals about power, corruption, and justice in America. The investigation was compromised from the beginning because those with the most to hide were in positions to control the flow of information and evidence. Dr. J. Paul de Rivers' psychological insights, the grand jury's persistent questioning, and the brave testimony of witnesses like MYRL McBride represent the forces of truth fighting against institutional corruption. Their efforts, though ultimately unsuccessful in bringing the killers to justice, have preserved enough evidence for us to understand what really happened to Elizabeth Short. The Black Dahlia case serves as a reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because those in power chose to suppress the truth. Elizabeth Short deserved justice, but she was denied it by a system more interested in protecting the guilty than serving the innocent. Today, more than 75 years after her death, Elizabeth Short has achieved a form of immortality she never could have imagined. Her story has inspired countless books, films, and investigations, ensuring that her name will be remembered long after. Those who failed her have been forgotten. The hunt for the Black Dahlia killer continues, not in police stations or courtrooms, but in the court of public opinion and the work of dedicated researchers who refuse to let this case die. Elizabeth Short's story is ultimately one of a young woman whose death revealed the darkness lurking beneath the glamorous surface of the American dream. In seeking to understand who killed Elizabeth Short, we've uncovered something perhaps more important: a comprehensive picture of how justice can be subverted, truth can be suppressed, and corruption can triumph when good people fail to act. The Black Dahlia case stands as both a memorial to Elizabeth Short and a warning about the price of allowing power to operate without accountability. Her killer may have escaped earthly justice, but Elizabeth Short's legacy endures as a symbol of the fight for truth against overwhelming odds. In remembering her story, we honor not just her memory, but our commitment to justice for all victims whose voices have been silenced by those who would prefer the truth remain buried. The hunt for the Black Dahlia killer may never end, but it has already served its most important purpose, ensuring that Elizabeth Short, a young woman who died alone and afraid, will never be forgotten. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of America's most enduring mysteries. The story of Elizabeth Short reminds us that behind every headline is a human being who deserved better than the fate that befell them. Until next time, keep questioning, keep investigating, and never let the powerful escape accountability for their actions.